Coming up with a build for Splatoon Raiders means deciding what tools you're planning to use, and the thing about tools is that you need different tools depending on the task. You can have the best hammer money can buy, but if you have to drive screws, nothing good is going to come of using it. First thing we need to decide before we know what tools to choose is what the nature of our task is. There are multiple different game modes in Splatoon Raiders, but the only one that scales infinitely is Bottomless Buffet, and you can make just about anything work before you get there, or even for a few hundred floors into it. Outside of something like speedrunning, so a self-imposed challenge, the one metric for success I'm hearing everyone refer to is the furthest floor reached in Bottomless. That's the mode that I'm going to be considering for this guide. Bottomless gives you 3 floors that you must complete one after the other to make progress. On each floor, you have 90 seconds to collect a certain number of power eggs against a combination of lessers, bosses, and seasoned salmonids. The maps vary somewhat in geometry, but they'll have visible spawn points, places where the player can fall into the water, and at least some verticality. The important thing to consider about Bottomless is how the difficulty gets scaled up. The number and variety of bosses doesn't change. After floor 100, Bottomless randomly selects the layout of one of the floors 1 through 99 and populates it with enemies scaled up to the required difficulty level. What changes is not the amount or type of enemies, it's the amount of health enemies have. That means that what scales up is the need for DPS, or damage per second. This creates a few secondary pressures. When the player does lose a life, the lose condition they tend to fall prey to isn't actually losing all 3 lives, but running out of time due to the seconds lost during the respawn. Losing a life allows the attempt to continue, but if you run out of time, the whole run ends then and there. While every enemy does give some power eggs, only bosses and seasoned salmonids give mega power eggs, worth 100 power eggs each. These are far, far more time efficient to collect than the eggs received from splatting lessers, which creates a secondary pressure. You want to be able to position yourself such that a nearby boss does not get physically blocked by lessers. Putting your DPS into clearing lessers and not bosses cuts down on your ability to collect power eggs and puts you at greater risk of running out of time. Another pressure is that picking up mega power eggs can be time consuming, especially with enemies in the way. Mobility and egg collection utility support a build by reducing the amount of time collecting eggs, thereby increasing the amount of time the player can spend damaging enemies in those 90 allotted seconds. Torque is the most powerful egg collection gadget simply because it covers a much larger area. Splatolites are a distant second, but on Power Tank you don't have access to Torque, so its value goes way up. If the egg collection's all you want and you'd rather use other gadgets, the Mega Power Egg Collector relic gives you about half the radius increase that Splatolites would. Since the player doesn't have infinite ammunition, some source of ink recovery on the build will increase DPS by minimizing or negating downtime. Again, we want to maximize the amount of time reducing boss HP bars and minimize the amount of time spent doing anything else. Now in mainline Splatoon, the only option you have is sitting in your ink, but in Raiders there are ways to avoid this, and you'd prefer using them. Sitting in your ink is downtime when you're not doing main weapon damage. Jump Bomb, Dash Bomb, and Blast Boot all get powerful ink resupplies that can keep even a fully airborne build that never submerges topped off with ink. The only other gadget with an ink resupply is High Fiver, which only gets half the amount back compared to the other 3. It's going to take separate videos to get through all the relics, gadget parts, main weapons, and how damage calculations work, but I'll talk briefly about major sources of damage to center a build around. As Bottomless goes on, gadget damage starts to fall off, and main weapon damage starts to become more and more critical. Therefore, anything that scales main weapon damage up becomes more and more valuable. The best main weapon scaling from a single perk comes from Icebreaker, the weapon power, with the caveat that only weapons with powerful single shots can take advantage of it. Fully leveled Icebreaker gives a 5x multiplier for one hit. Ideally, you'd want this single shot to be hitting multiple enemies, not just one, so weapons with piercing or AoE damage improve these builds drastically. Fortunately, that's most of the hard-hitting weapons in the game already anyway. Icebreaker builds will also obviously need a source of freeze, which incentivizes picking certain gadgets. This is why you see so much of Blast Boot, Jump Bomb, and Meteor Mitt in builds that have been pushed deep into Bottomless. These are the only gadgets with 100% freeze chance. Better to have these 100% chances to freeze than to have to gamble on a weapon's shot proccing. At best, you've got a 12% chance on the slow-firing weapons like bow or X-Blow, but something like a Jet Squelcher only gets a 6% chance, so even with the faster fire rate, your odds are not that much better. High Fiver can only give you a 60% chance, so while that's always nice when you do get it, not getting it when you're really hoping for it obviously sucks and bumps them down a little in terms of value. Another powerful source of damage is gathering lessers around a boss to pull off a fermentation explosion, which also incentivizes AoE damage or the ability of a shot to pierce. It would be difficult not to consider Torque Screw for this, due to its ability not only to ferment large groups of salmonids, but also to gather the salmonids all in one place, so they're hitting each other with the explosions. You can get a discount generic brand version of these effects with Tether Whale if you're willing to give up floaty fun and you're willing to add positioning around your whale to your mental stack, though those are all really big ifs. Like I said, I'm going to have to do a whole separate video to get more into the details about damage calculations, because that's a lot more complicated than I thought it would be. But to give a few tips based on what I've been learning, damage surge gadget parts, which you find on Flywire and Dash Bomb, are absurd and always worth maxing out. Airborne damage up, which is on Flywire and Jump Bomb, is extremely strong too, as long as you're playing a flying build, though you can't stack 2 airborne damage ups if you're using both Jump Bomb and Flywire. The ideal flying build to take advantage of these is therefore probably Dash Bomb Jump Bomb, not Flywire. Based on how their sources of cooldown reduction work, you'll get way more Dash Bombs off, realistically, and while Flywire does more damage by itself, it stops you from firing your main weapon for so long that you'll still do much more damage during a Dash Bomb anyway. Since these particular gadgets are essential to keep cycling to buff your damage, it can be worth investing in gadget cooldown parts and relics to give yourself a big indirect damage and mobility increase. Tank Surge, the Power Relic damage up, all set and risky reward help, but they scale worse than you'd think they would due to a quirk of how the damage is calculated. Still probably worth running if you have empty slots, but stacking them all together, not as worth it. More on that in my future video. Concentrated attack doesn't get nerfed in the same way as these, but like I've explained in another video, it's highly dependent on only doing single target damage with both your main weapon and gadgets. And with how powerful both AoE and gadgets like Splatlights and Torque Screw can be, the opportunity cost is usually too high for the extra damage to be worth it. As for relics, doubling up on long range between the weapon power and relic is unusually powerful as long as you have a weapon that can play at that range. See my video linked in the upper right if you're not sure where that range is. Always find a way to ferment if you can fit it into your build. Like I said, there will be more detailed deep dives into specific areas like damage calculations, but hopefully now you have a better idea of why higher level builds are gravitating towards certain options. You can sort of arrive at a build featured in, say, a Taro Taro guide from first principles by spotting these underlying trends and working them out to their logical conclusions. Hope this has inspired some ideas to mess around with.